Captain Sarah Chun had always known she was different from the other pilots on the base. While her male colleagues gathered around the coffee machine, sharing stories of their weekend adventures and bragging about their flight hours, she quietly reviewed mission reports and studied aircraft manuals. At 28 years old, she had already logged more flight time than pilots with twice her experience. But respect on the military base didn't come from numbers on a logbook. It came from proving yourself when everyone expected you to fail. The morning started like any other at Fort Campbell Army Base in Kentucky. The humid summer air hung heavy over the tarmac as maintenance crews performed their daily inspections on the fleet of Apache helicopters. Sarah walked across the flight line, her boots clicking against the concrete, when she heard the familiar voice of General Marcus Thompson echoing from the hangar. "I don't care what the Pentagon says about integration," the general's voice carried across the open space. "Some jobs just aren't meant for women. These machines require strength, split-second decisions, and nerves that don't crack under pressure." Sarah paused, not wanting to eavesdrop, but unable to ignore the conversation happening just around the corner. She recognized the voices of several senior officers, including Colonel James Mitchell and Major Robert Hayes, both of whom had made their opinions about female pilots abundantly clear over the past months. "Sir, with respect," Colonel Mitchell replied, "the new pilot assignments include 3 female officers. Captain Chun has exceptional scores, but flying an Apache in combat conditions is entirely different from training exercises." General Thompson's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Exceptional scores on paper don't mean anything when you're dodging surface-to-air missiles or providing close air support for troops under fire. These women might be fine for transport helicopters or reconnaissance, but the Apache is a weapon system that demands everything a pilot can give." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had heard these arguments before, but hearing them from the base's commanding general stung differently. She had worked twice as hard as her male counterparts, studied longer, trained harder, and still faced constant scrutiny about her capabilities. "What about the simulation results, sir?" Major Hayes asked. "Captain Chin scored higher than any pilot we've tested in the past 6 months. Her reaction times, tactical thinking, and weapons systems management are all exceptional." "Simulations," General Thompson scoffed. "Anyone can press buttons and follow computer protocols. Real combat flying requires instincts that can't be taught or measured by machines. It requires a warrior mentality that, frankly, these female pilots just don't possess." Sarah stepped around the corner, her presence immediately noticed by the group of officers. The conversation stopped abruptly, and General Thompson turned to face her with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Captain Chun," he said, his voice taking on a formal tone, "I didn't realize you were there." "Good morning, General," Sarah replied, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the anger building inside her chest. "I was heading to the briefing room for the morning flight schedule review." General Thompson studied her for a moment, his eyes calculating. The other officers shifted uncomfortably, aware that their conversation had been overheard. The general was known for his direct approach and his willingness to challenge anyone, regardless of rank or gender. "Actually, Captain, since you're here, perhaps you'd like to address something we've been discussing," General Thompson said, stepping closer. "We were talking about the practical limitations of female pilots in combat aircraft like the Apache. Care to share your thoughts?" Sarah felt the weight of the moment. She could deflect, make polite conversation, and continue with her day. Or she could meet this challenge head-on, knowing that her response could define her career and the opportunities for female pilots who would follow. "Sir, I believe that pilot capability should be measured by performance, not assumptions based on gender," Sarah replied evenly. "The Apache helicopter responds to skill, training, and decision-making ability. These qualities aren't determined by whether a pilot is male or female." General Thompson's eyebrows raised slightly. "That's a textbook answer, Captain. But textbooks don't prepare you for the reality of combat. The Apache isn't just a helicopter. It's a flying tank with enough firepower to level a city block. It requires physical strength to handle extreme maneuvers, emotional control under life-threatening pressure, and the killer instinct to use its weapons effectively." "I understand the Apache's capabilities, sir," Sarah responded. "I've studied every system, every weapon, and every tactical application. I've completed all required training and exceeded performance standards in every evaluation. The general walked closer, his presence imposing but not threatening. Training is one thing, Captain, but have you ever felt the G-forces from a high-speed evasive maneuver while tracking multiple targets? Have you ever had to make a split-second decision about engaging an enemy position while friendly forces are in danger? Sarah maintained eye contact. No, sir, I haven't had those combat experiences yet. But neither have many of the male pilots currently flying Apaches. Combat experience is gained through service, not gender. Colonel Mitchell cleared his throat. General, perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting. But General Thompson raised his hand, clearly enjoying the exchange. No, this is exactly the kind of conversation we need to have. Captain Chun, you speak confidently about your abilities, but confidence without proof is just arrogance. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but kept her voice steady. Sir, I'm prepared to prove my capabilities whenever given the opportunity. General Thompson smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. Is that so? Well, Captain, it just so happens that we have an Apache that needs a maintenance test flight this morning. Simple flight pattern, systems check, nothing too demanding. He paused, watching her reaction. Of course, if you'd prefer to stick to your scheduled training flights on the smaller aircraft. The challenge hung in the air between them. Sarah understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't really about a maintenance test flight. This was about General Thompson proving his point about female pilots in front of his senior staff. He expected her to decline, to make excuses, or to accept, and then perform poorly. I would be honored to conduct the test flight, sir, Sarah said without hesitation. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. General, Captain Chun hasn't been certified on the Apache yet. Regulations require. Regulations can be flexible for exceptional circumstances, General Thompson interrupted, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Besides, Captain Chin just assured us that she studied every system and exceeded all performance standards. Surely a simple test flight shouldn't present any challenges. Sarah realized she was walking into a trap, but backing down now would confirm every stereotype about female pilots. When would you like me to conduct the flight, sir? How about right now? General Thompson gestured toward the hangar where a pristine Apache helicopter sat ready for flight. The maintenance crew has completed their pre-flight inspection. All systems are operational. Should be a straightforward 45-minute flight. Take her up, run through the basic maneuvers, test the weapon system's targeting, and bring her back down. Major Hayes looked uncomfortable. Sir, shouldn't Captain Chun have a co-pilot for her first Apache flight? General Thompson shook his head. Captain Chun has assured us of her capabilities. Besides, it's just a maintenance flight. Nothing she can't handle, right, Captain? Sarah felt the weight of expectation from everyone present. She knew that accepting meant flying an aircraft she had only studied but never actually piloted. The Apache was notorious for its complexity and unforgiving handling characteristics. But refusing would mean accepting defeat before even trying. I'll need 15 minutes to review the pre-flight checklist and familiarize myself with this specific aircraft's modifications, Sarah said. Of course, General Thompson replied. Take all the time you need. We'll be watching from the observation tower. His tone suggested he expected to witness her failure. As the group of officers headed toward the control tower, Sarah walked toward the Apache helicopter. The aircraft was beautiful and intimidating, a sleek predator designed for war. The tandem cockpit, advanced targeting systems, and mounted weapons represented the pinnacle of military aviation technology. She spent the next 15 minutes methodically reviewing every system, checking every control, and running through emergency procedures in her mind. The Apache was more complex than any aircraft she had flown, but the fundamental principles were the same. Years of training and study had prepared her for this moment, even if she hadn't expected it to come as a public challenge. Chief Warrant Officer Mike Rodriguez, the maintenance supervisor, approached as she completed her inspection. Captain, I heard what's happening here, he said quietly. The general's been looking for ways to prove his point about female pilots. This isn't a fair test. Sarah looked at the experienced maintenance officer. Chief Rodriguez, is this aircraft airworthy? Yes, ma'am, perfectly. But flying an Apache for the first time without proper checkout procedures. He shook his head. It's not standard protocol. I appreciate your concern, Chief, but I need to do this flight, Sarah replied. Can you give me any advice? Rodriguez glanced toward the control tower where the officers were gathering. The Apache responds differently than other helicopters. She's heavier, more powerful, and less forgiving of mistakes. The collective requires more strength, especially during aggressive maneuvers. Don't try to fight the aircraft, work with her. And remember, every input you make has consequences. She'll do exactly what you tell her to do, whether it's what you meant or not. Sarah nodded, absorbing the advice. Anything else? Trust your training, and don't let them get in your head, Rodriguez said. You've got good instincts, Captain. Use them. Sarah climbed into the front cockpit, adjusting the seat and familiarizing herself with the control layout. The Apache's cockpit was cramped but efficiently designed, with every instrument and control positioned for maximum effectiveness during combat operations. She ran through the startup sequence, her hands moving confidently over switches and controls. The twin General Electric engines spooled up with a deep, powerful whine that she felt through the aircraft's frame. The main rotor began turning slowly, then faster, until the distinctive thwop-thwop sound of the Apache filled the air. Through her headset, she heard the control tower acknowledge her ready status. Apache 77, you are cleared for takeoff. Maintain standard traffic pattern and report when ready for systems check sequence. Sarah took a deep breath and gently pulled on the collective control. The Apache lifted smoothly off the ground, and she felt the incredible power of the aircraft responding to her inputs. Despite her nervousness, the helicopter felt right under her control, like an extension of her own will. As she climbed to pattern altitude and began the first series of maneuvers, Sarah realized that General Thompson had unknowingly given her exactly what she needed, a chance to prove that gender had nothing to do with flying ability. The Apache was challenging, demanding, and unforgiving, but it was also magnificent. And Sarah Chun was about to show everyone exactly what a female pilot could do with one of the most advanced attack helicopters in the world. The real test was just beginning, and Sarah was determined to exceed every expectation, even if it meant risking her career on a single flight that would define everything that came after. The Apache climbed smoothly through the morning air as Sarah executed the first series of standard maneuvers. From the control tower, General Thompson watched through binoculars, his expression unreadable. Colonel Mitchell and Major Hayes flanked him, both clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to challenge their commanding officer's decision. She's handling the basic flight controls well, Major Hayes observed, trying to maintain a neutral tone. General Thompson lowered his binoculars. Basic controls are elementary. Let's see how she performs when we add some complexity. He keyed his radio microphone. Apache 77, begin the advanced maneuvering sequence. Execute a series of tactical approaches followed by evasive maneuvers. In the cockpit, Sarah acknowledged the instruction while mentally preparing for what she knew would be increasingly difficult challenges. The tactical approach sequence required precise control during rapid altitude changes, high-speed directional shifts, and coordinated weapon system targeting. These maneuvers were designed to simulate combat conditions where pilots needed to engage enemy positions while avoiding defensive fire. She began the first tactical approach, diving the Apache toward a designated ground target while maintaining perfect alignment with the targeting system. The helicopter responded aggressively to her inputs, the nose dropping sharply as she increased forward speed. The G-forces pushed her back into her seat, but she maintained steady control pressure on the cyclic and collective controls. From the ground, Chief Rodriguez watched with growing admiration. He had seen dozens of pilots attempt these maneuvers during their certification flights, and Captain Chun was performing them with a precision that exceeded many veteran Apache pilots. Her movements were smooth and deliberate, showing an intuitive understanding of the aircraft's capabilities. Execute high-speed evasive maneuvers, came the next instruction from the tower. Simulate avoiding surface-to-air missile threats. Sarah immediately threw the Apache into a series of sharp turns and altitude changes designed to break the tracking of enemy weapons systems. The helicopter banked steeply to the left, then rolled quickly to the right, while she simultaneously adjusted power and collective pitch to maintain controlled flight. The maneuvers required extraordinary coordination between her hands and feet, with each control input affecting multiple aspects of the aircraft's behavior. Inside the control tower, the atmosphere grew tense as the officers watched Sarah push the Apache through maneuvers that would challenge any pilot. General Thompson's expression remained stern, but his experienced eye could see that Captain Chun was not just surviving the test, she was excelling at it. "Sir," Colonel Mitchell said quietly, "her performance is quite impressive. Perhaps we should consider—" "We're not finished yet," General Thompson interrupted. "Anyone can follow a script of maneuvers. Let's see how she handles unexpected situations." He keyed the radio again. "Apache 77, you have a simulated engine failure. Execute emergency auto-rotation landing procedures." The engine failure simulation was one of the most challenging emergency procedures any helicopter pilot could face. It required immediately recognizing the emergency, entering auto-rotation to maintain rotor speed without engine power, and executing a controlled landing using only the energy stored in the spinning rotor blades. Many experienced pilots struggled with this procedure, and attempting it in an Apache made it exponentially more difficult. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she processed the emergency scenario. She had practiced auto-rotation procedures hundreds of times in simulators and smaller helicopters, but never in an Apache. The procedure required precise timing and perfect control inputs, too early or too late, and the aircraft would hit the ground too hard, potentially causing catastrophic damage. She immediately lowered the collective to reduce rotor blade angle and entered auto-rotation, feeling the Apache begin its controlled descent. The aircraft's heavy weight meant she had less time to execute the procedure than in lighter helicopters. She needed to maintain the perfect balance between descent rate and rotor speed while selecting an appropriate landing area. "There," she said to herself, spotting a clear area near the maintenance hangar that would provide enough space for an emergency landing. She began the approach, carefully managing the helicopter's energy and position. In the control tower, even General Thompson found himself leaning forward as he watched the critical phase of the emergency procedure. Captain Chun was performing the auto-rotation with textbook precision, but the real test would come in the final seconds when she needed to convert the Apache's forward motion and descent rate into a controlled landing. Sarah waited until the last possible moment, then pulled firmly on the collective control to change the rotor blade angle and convert stored rotor energy into lift. The Apache flared dramatically, its nose rising as forward speed decreased and descent rate slowed. She felt the aircraft settle gently onto the designated landing area with barely a bump. The control tower fell silent for several seconds. Even General Thompson, who had been determined to prove female pilots couldn't handle the Apache's demands, found himself impressed by what he had just witnessed. The auto-rotation landing had been executed with a level of skill that many of his veteran pilots couldn't match. Outstanding emergency procedure execution, came the reluctant acknowledgement from the tower. Apache 77, restart, and return to flight operations. Sarah went through the restart sequence, bringing the Apache's engines back online and lifting off for the final portion of her test flight. But General Thompson wasn't finished. He had one more challenge prepared, one that would push Captain Chun beyond standard procedures into truly demanding territory. Apache 77, proceed to the weapons range for live fire exercise. You will engage multiple ground targets using both the main gun and missile systems. This instruction surprised even Colonel Mitchell. Live fire exercises were typically conducted only after pilots had completed extensive Apache-specific training and certification. Using the helicopter's powerful 30mm automatic cannon and Hellfire missile systems required not just flying skill, but precise coordination between flight control and weapons targeting. Sarah acknowledged the instruction and turned toward the base's weapons range, a secure area several miles from the main facilities. She was entering unknown territory now. While she understood the Apache's weapons systems theoretically, she had never actually fired them from a moving helicopter. The weapons range featured a series of ground targets designed to simulate various combat scenarios. Tank hulls, building structures, and vehicle targets were positioned throughout the range to provide realistic training conditions. Sarah approached the range and received targeting instructions from the range control officer. Apache 77, your first target is the tank hull at coordinates Alpha 3. Use main gun engagement, approach from the east. Sarah banked the Apache toward the designated target, simultaneously activating the sophisticated targeting system. The heads-up display showed target acquisition data while she maneuvered the helicopter into firing position. The Apache's gun system could automatically track targets once acquired, but the pilot still needed to maintain proper flight profile and trigger the weapons at the optimal moment. She lined up the shot and squeezed the trigger. The 30mm cannon erupted with a thunderous roar, sending a stream of high-explosive rounds toward the target. The Apache shuddered slightly from the recoil, but Sarah maintained perfect control as the rounds impacted exactly on target, sending metal fragments flying from the destroyed tank hull. Excellent marksmanship, came the assessment from range control. Proceed to target Bravo 7 for missile engagement. The missile engagement required even more sophisticated coordination between flying and weapon systems. Sarah needed to maintain proper standoff distance while achieving target lock with the Hellfire missile's guidance system. She approached the target building structure, activated the missile system, and waited for confirmation of target lock. The heads-up display showed solid target acquisition. Sarah verified the target was clear of any friendly positions, then launched the Hellfire missile. The weapon streaked away from the Apache with a bright exhaust trail, its guidance system steering it directly toward the target. Seconds later, the building structure disappeared in a massive explosion that sent debris hundreds of feet into the air. Back in the control tower, General Thompson watched the destruction through his binoculars without speaking. Captain Chun had not only demonstrated exceptional flying ability, but had also shown that she could effectively employ the Apache's weapon systems under demanding conditions. Her performance exceeded that of most pilots during their initial Apache certification flights. Sir, Major Hayes said carefully, Captain Chun has completed all requested maneuvers and exercises with exceptional results. Her performance has been exemplary. General Thompson remained silent for several moments, clearly struggling with what he had witnessed. His preconceptions about female pilots had been challenged by undeniable evidence of superior capability. Apache 77 returned to base for landing. He finally radioed. Sarah acknowledged and turned the Apache toward home. As she flew back toward the airfield, she reflected on what had just occurred. She had not only met General Thompson's challenges, but had exceeded them in ways that demonstrated her readiness for any mission the Apache might be called upon to perform. Landing the Apache required the same precision and skill as every other aspect of the flight. Sarah approached the designated landing pad, carefully managing the helicopter's descent and forward speed. The Apache settled onto the tarmac with perfect control, engines winding down as she completed the shutdown sequence. As she climbed out of the cockpit, Sarah saw General Thompson and his officers walking across the tarmac toward her. The general's expression was serious, but she couldn't read whether he was angry, impressed, or simply processing what had occurred. Chief Rodriguez approached first, a broad smile on his weathered face. Captain, that was some of the finest flying I've seen in 23 years of military service. You handled that Apache like you'd been flying her for years. Sarah thanked the maintenance chief, but her attention remained focused on General Thompson, who had stopped a few feet away and was studying her with an intensity that made her nervous. Captain Chun, the general said slowly, that was an exceptional demonstration of flying ability. Sarah maintained military bearing. Thank you, sir. The Apache is an outstanding aircraft. General Thompson nodded, but his expression suggested he was wrestling with internal conflict. Your performance today has certainly provided food for thought about our pilot assignment policies. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. Sir, based on what we observed today, Captain Chin clearly possesses the skills necessary for Apache operations. Perhaps we should recommend her for immediate certification. But General Thompson raised his hand to stop the discussion. We'll address certification and assignments later. Captain Chun, report to my office at 1400 hours. We have some things to discuss about your future role in this unit. As the officers walked away, Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. She had proven her capabilities beyond any reasonable doubt. But General Thompson's reaction suggested that her demonstration might have created complications she hadn't anticipated. The afternoon meeting would determine whether her exceptional performance had opened doors or created new obstacles for her career and the future of female combat pilots. The morning's test flight had become something far more significant than a simple maintenance check. It had become a defining moment that would impact not just Sarah's career, but the entire debate about women in combat aviation roles. The afternoon meeting with General Thompson weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she spent the intervening hours reviewing flight manuals and preparing for what could be a career-defining conversation. Word of her exceptional Apache performance had spread quickly through the base, generating reactions ranging from enthusiastic support to skeptical dismissal from those who questioned whether one successful flight could prove anything meaningful. At precisely 1400 hours, Sarah knocked on General Thompson's office door. His secretary directed her inside, where she found the general seated behind his desk reviewing what appeared to be flight evaluation reports and personnel files. The office was decorated with military commendations, aircraft photographs, and mementos from a distinguished career spanning 3 decades of military aviation. "Captain Chun, please have a seat," General Thompson said without looking up from the documents. His tone was professional, but carried an undercurrent of tension that put Sarah on alert. She took the offered chair and waited while the general finished his review. The silence stretched for several minutes before he finally closed the file folder and looked directly at her. "Captain, your performance this morning was undeniably impressive," he began. "Your flying skills, decision-making under pressure, and weapons system employment exceeded the standards we typically see from pilots with significantly more Apache experience." Sarah maintained her composure despite feeling relieved by the acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir. I was honored to have the opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities." General Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "That's exactly the problem, Captain. Your demonstration has created a situation that goes far beyond one pilot's qualifications." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Sir, I don't understand." The general stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight line where Apache helicopters were positioned for afternoon operations. "Captain Chun, I've been in military aviation for 31 years. I've seen combat in 3 different conflicts, commanded multiple units, and trained hundreds of pilots. My positions on female combat pilots weren't based on prejudice. They were based on decades of experience and statistical analysis of performance under extreme conditions." He turned back to face her. "What you accomplished this morning has forced me to confront the possibility that my experience-based conclusions might be wrong. And that creates a significant problem." Sarah remained silent, sensing that General Thompson was working through an internal struggle that went beyond her individual situation. "You see, Captain, I've spent the past 2 years arguing against expanded combat roles for female pilots. I've testified before congressional committees, filed reports with the Pentagon, and influenced policy decisions affecting the careers of dozens of female aviators. I've been the primary voice opposing integration of women into advanced combat aircraft assignments." The implications of his statement began to dawn on Sarah. Her successful demonstration hadn't just proven her individual capabilities. It had undermined the foundation of arguments that General Thompson had been making at the highest levels of military leadership. "This morning's flight has been witnessed by multiple officers, recorded by range cameras, and documented in official reports," the general continued. "Word will reach Pentagon officials within days, if it hasn't already. My credibility regarding female pilot capabilities has been seriously compromised." Sarah finally spoke. "Sir, with respect, couldn't this be seen as new information that supports updating previous positions based on evidence?" General Thompson's laugh was bitter. "Captain, you clearly don't understand how military politics work. Admitting that I was wrong about female combat pilots doesn't just affect my credibility. It affects my career, my future assignments, and my ability to influence important decisions. Leaders who reverse major policy positions are seen as unreliable, regardless of the reasons for the change." The conversation was taking a direction that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Instead of celebrating her achievement or discussing her future assignments. General Thompson was explaining how her success had become a professional liability for him. "Sir, what are you saying exactly?" General Thompson returned to his desk and sat down heavily. "I'm saying, Captain Chun, that your exceptional performance has put me in an impossible position. I can either maintain my previous stance and ignore clear evidence of your capabilities, which would be dishonest and potentially harmful to military effectiveness, or I can acknowledge the evidence and face the professional consequences of having been wrong about such an important issue." Sarah felt a growing sense of unease about where this conversation was heading. "General, surely the right thing to do is to support policies that maximize military effectiveness, regardless of personal consequences." "The right thing," General Thompson repeated slowly. "Captain, let me ask you something. Do you think your gender played any role in your motivation to perform well this morning?" The question surprised Sarah. "Sir, I was motivated to perform well because I'm a military pilot committed to excellence in service to my country." "That's a perfect answer, Captain. But it's not entirely honest, is it?" General Thompson leaned forward. "You weren't just representing yourself this morning. You were representing every female pilot who might be given similar opportunities in the future. The pressure you felt wasn't just about your individual performance. It was about proving that women belong in combat aircraft." Sarah considered his words carefully. "Sir, I suppose that additional motivation might have influenced my preparation and focus." "Exactly," General Thompson said. "Which raises an interesting question about whether your performance this morning represents what we could typically expect from female Apache pilots, or whether it represents an exceptional effort driven by unique circumstances." Sarah felt defensive anger building, but forced herself to remain calm. "General, are you suggesting that my performance was somehow artificial or unsustainable?" "I'm suggesting, Captain, that one exceptional flight doesn't necessarily prove broader policy points about gender integration in combat aviation." He paused, watching her reaction. "However, I'm also acknowledging that your performance exceeded anything I thought possible for a first-time Apache pilot of any gender." The general opened another file folder on his desk. "Captain Chen, I've reviewed your complete service record, training scores, and performance evaluations. Your credentials are exceptional by any standard. You've consistently outperformed your peers in every measurable category." Sarah waited for the continuation, sensing that General Thompson was building towards something significant. "Which brings me to my decision about how to handle this situation," he continued. "I have three options. First, I can classify this morning's flight as an informal demonstration and recommend that you complete standard Apache certification procedures over the next several months. This would minimize the immediate impact while allowing you to progress normally through the system." Sarah nodded, understanding that this option would essentially bury the significance of her performance. "Second, I can immediately recommend you for advanced Apache certification and combat mission assignment, which would expedite your training and deployment timeline. This would be based on your demonstrated capabilities, but would also create significant attention from higher headquarters." The second option represented everything Sarah had hoped for professionally, but she sensed there was a complication. "Third," General Thompson said slowly, "I can request immediate transfer to another command position, citing personal reasons, and recommend that my replacement review all female pilot policies without the influence of my previous positions." Sarah stared at him in shock. "Sir, are you saying you would step down because of my flight performance?" General Thompson's expression was somber. "Captain, I'm saying that your performance has demonstrated that my judgment on a critical military policy issue was seriously flawed. Leaders who make significant errors in judgment that affect the careers and opportunities of military personnel have an obligation to consider whether they should continue in positions of authority." The weight of the situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her moment of triumph was threatening to destroy the career of a respected general officer. "Sir, surely that's an extreme response. Couldn't you simply modify your position based on new evidence?" "Captain Chun, you're young and idealistic, and those are admirable qualities. But in the real world of military politics and leadership, admitting fundamental errors in judgment has consequences that extend far beyond individual careers." General Thompson stood again and walked to a wall displaying his military commendations. I've built my reputation on decisive leadership and sound judgment. If I suddenly reverse course on an issue I've championed for years, it damages not just my credibility, but the credibility of any future positions I might take. Sarah felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes. General, it seems unfair that excellence in performance should create these kinds of problems. Unfair. General Thompson turned back to her with a sad smile. Captain, fairness has very little to do with military service or leadership responsibility. Sometimes doing the right thing requires personal sacrifice. He returned to his desk and picked up a formal document. I've prepared 3 sets of paperwork corresponding to the 3 options I outlined. The choice of which to submit is yours, Captain Chun. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Sir, you're asking me to decide your future? I'm asking you to decide what outcome best serves the military and the future of female combat pilots, General Thompson replied. Your performance this morning has earned you the right to influence how this situation is resolved. Sarah looked at the 3 document sets, each representing a dramatically different future for herself, General Thompson, and female military pilots. The weight of the decision felt overwhelming. Sir, may I ask what you recommend? General Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Captain, I recommend that you choose the option that allows you to serve your country most effectively while advancing opportunities for the qualified female pilots who will follow you. My career is near its end regardless of how this situation resolves. Your career, and the careers of other female aviators, are just beginning. Sarah realized that General Thompson was essentially recommending that she choose the option that would force his resignation while advancing her own opportunities and those of other female pilots. It was a gesture of remarkable professional integrity that acknowledged his previous mistakes while prioritizing military effectiveness over personal consequences. General Thompson, Sarah said quietly, your willingness to consider these options demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership the military needs. Perhaps there's a 4th option we haven't considered. The general looked at her with interest. What do you have in mind, Captain? Sarah took a deep breath. What if you became the strongest advocate for qualified female combat pilots? Your change of position would carry more weight than anyone else's support because it would be based on witnessed evidence rather than political correctness. You could lead the transition rather than become a casualty of it. General Thompson considered her words carefully. That's an interesting perspective, Captain. But it would require acknowledging that I was wrong about something I felt very strongly about. Sir, it would require acknowledging that you were willing to change your position when presented with compelling evidence. That seems like exactly the kind of intellectual honesty we want in military leaders. For the first time since the conversation began, General Thompson smiled genuinely. Captain Chun, you may have just provided me with a way to turn a professional crisis into an opportunity for positive change. He set aside the prepared documents and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Instead of choosing between those 3 options, let's create a 4th option together. You'll receive immediate Apache certification and priority assignment to the most demanding combat units available. And I'll become the strongest advocate for expanding qualified female pilots into all combat aviation roles. Sarah felt a surge of relief and excitement. Sir, that sounds like it could benefit everyone involved. It will also require both of us to perform at exceptional levels going forward, General Thompson warned. You'll be under intense scrutiny as other commanders watch to see if your performance remains consistently excellent. And I'll be challenged by colleagues who will question my change of position. Sarah stood and extended her hand. General, I'm prepared for that challenge if you are. General Thompson shook her hand firmly. Captain Chun, I believe your performance this morning has changed more than just my opinion about female combat pilots. I think it may have changed the future of military aviation itself. As Sarah left the general's office, she reflected on how a simple flight demonstration had evolved into something far more significant. Her exceptional performance had not only proven her individual capabilities, but had also created an opportunity to advance opportunities for all qualified female military pilots. Sometimes excellence demanded courage not just in flying, but in challenging the assumptions that limited human potential.